All right, so my name is Josh Good, and like my brother said, my wife and I are leading WSA Youth, and we are youth pastors at Westgate Church. And since we got called out last night, you now know us better than we know ourselves. So, uh, but I feel a message that's been stirring in my heart that I really want to communicate this morning to you all, and it's about a population of people that we've been referencing but hasn't actually been named, and it's the largest population. It's going to be the largest population on earth starting this year, and we all have it in common. And you're probably thinking, who am I talking about? I'm talking about Generation Z. And Generation Z is the age group of people born between 1995 and 2012. So that puts them anywhere between 7 and 24 years old. And so we like to throw around the term millennial a lot. Me and my wife are millennials, barely. We're like right on the cusp. But there's another generation coming up through called Generation Z, and they're actually quite different from millennials. And I felt God stirring a message in my heart about Generation Z that I wanted to share with you guys, because I feel like it's a very misunderstood generation. And many of you guys who have kids in that age range are probably like, yeah. Actually, 58% of parents say that they feel like other cultures have more in common with their kids than they do with their kids. So we have this generational gap forming, and I want to help you to see what I see God doing in Generation Z. And so hopefully in the next 10 minutes, I can share what's in my heart for this generation. And so I want to share 3 markers with you guys that I see happening in this generation that really stand out to me, that I feel like are set apart. And so the first thing that I see is a global generation rising up. And so what I mean by that is a young woman that's being raised in Nairobi, Kenya, and a young woman being raised in Lancaster County, they each have smartphones. They each have Facebook. They each have YouTube. They each have Instagram. You know, we have these same apps. And so what is happening to the young person in each of these places is, while they may not be friends with each other, they're being influenced in similar ways to one another. And so this is really interesting. This is the first time in human history that this has ever happened worldwide, that like people are being influenced in similar ways in an entire generation. And so it's really kind of mind-boggling to wrap your mind around that fact that like there's something happening in this, whether good or bad, however you want to look at it. There's a common generation rising up, and I see it humanizing the world because we're being influenced in similar ways. And so this girl in Nairobi, Kenya, like I said, the parents feel like, wow, she actually is being influenced a lot more similarly to the girl in Lancaster than she is to her own culture. So there's this interesting interculturational mix happening. And so I see that as the first marker, is that there's a global generation rising up underneath of our feet. And so, you could say that's true for the millennial generation, but we didn't grow up with Facebook and social media. That kind of came on when we were maybe 12, 13, 14 years old, maybe a little older for others that are millennials in the room. And so this is a generation that's grown up only knowing this. So this is the first marker I see happening in this generation, a global generation rising up. And I feel like the effects are yet to be seen. The second marker that I see in this generation is that they are a generation that genuinely believes they can change the world. And I can't put a direct finger on exactly what it is, but I think, again, it goes back to the fact that we live in a world now that every person has a voice. Every person has access to their favorite celebrities, to their favorite pastors, to people they listen to. We all have a voice that we can carry. And additionally, this generation is not a respecter of persons. It's actually more important to have a blue check mark behind your name than it is to have a DR, if you're a doctor, in front of your name, right? It's really interesting. This generation follows what they deem to be relevant, not what culture would say should be deemed respected. And so it's given them a bad rap in a lot of ways, but I just show you that that's a marker that I see happening in this generation. And so they genuinely believe that they can change the world. And I think it's because they've seen other people, their peers, the Justin Biebers, the other teens that are becoming YouTube famous. I mean, people are rising up. They're having voices at a younger age than they ever have before. Influencers all over the world. I mean, it's a new person every day popping up. Look at this YouTube video. Look at whatever, and someone becomes famous overnight. So people are genuinely believing they can change the world. They're saying that this generation, their greatest desire in work is to make a difference, not make money. It's the much more driving factor in their occupation is that they want to make a difference. They're not driven by money like past generations have been. So this is really interesting. So this is stirring. I'm learning this stuff. I'm reading about them. And then this third marker that I want to say is I feel like one way to describe them, the third marker that I see happening is that they're a Y generation, like WHY. They question the status quo like no other generation has before. They're actually the least likely generation to volunteer of any alive on earth right now. But they think it's because, and I believe this too, is because they want to find a way that we don't need volunteers. Not because they're so built up inside of themselves that they don't want to volunteer. They're just like, well, why are there homeless in our city? Like, instead of just serving food, like, what if we went to the root of the problem? And so I feel like we have, this is the reason why I believe, is because they've grown up in a world that is maximizing efficiency in every area. And so they've grown up in a world, at least in America, we can order something on Amazon Prime and it'll be there in 2 days. Like, I can go online and boom, it's at my door, right? So everything that we're surrounded with, like all the apps, everything, it's just to make our life easier, more efficient, efficiency. And so I think when they encounter cultural dilemmas, there's a problem that rises up inside of them that says, well, why is that happening? Like, if we can deliver a package to someone's house anywhere in the country in 2 days, why is there a homeless problem? And so I see this stirring in this generation. And so these three markers, again, are they're a global generation, they're a Y generation, and the third one is they genuinely believe they can change the world. So these are three markers that I see happening. And I want to tell you two short stories from history about leaders, God's anointing that fell on two young leaders, two teenagers. And the first one I want to talk about is a young peasant farm girl born in the 1400s named Joan of Arc. And I don't know how many of you know the story of Joan of Arc. She was born in France. It was in the midst of a 100 Years' War. And in the middle of this, she's grown up in her entire life in the middle of a war. She has an encounter with God at the age of 13 in a garden. And she hears the Lord say that you're to put the crown back on King Charles's head in France. And sounds like a crazy person, but takes it upon herself. And France is at such a low point. They haven't won a war in a generation. And she takes it upon herself, and people start to believe her, and they give her a chance. And then she goes into this battle, and France has one of the greatest victories they've had in an entire generation. And they start to advance through. And Joan, she would only carry a banner, just a standard. She wouldn't kill people. She carried a sword, but she wouldn't kill anyone. She would just carry a banner with her. But she took it upon herself to get a breakthrough for a generation. She saw something and she took it upon herself. She took the responsibility upon herself to get a breakthrough for a generation. And then the second person from history I want to tell you guys about is a story you might know a little better in 1 Samuel 17, David and Goliath. And David shows up on the scene, and he's a teenager. And he shows up on the scene, and they've been in the midst of this scuffle for 40 days. And he shows up, and he sees this giant standing against his people. And this is what he says. And this is a key verse for me. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And so, how do people respond to David? His brother responded and rebuked him. You know, it doesn't say the word entitled in here, but I bet they thought, this kid is so entitled. Shows up on the scene, thinks he can take down this Goliath that's standing against us. But he doesn't care. He takes it upon himself to get a breakthrough for his people and for a generation. And so these two markers I see, and I'm learning about these stories a couple weeks ago, and I feel the Lord say, I've placed an uncommon bravery upon a generation of young people. And you don't even see it. We don't even see it. We see the entitlement, we see the apathy, the laziness, but we don't see what's stirring inside of our young people, this generation that's rising up inside of us, this fearlessness to take on the giants that have plagued our society for years. And so I want to challenge the Dove family, because I also felt the Lord stirring this in my heart, because when you think about the Israelite people as they wandered through the desert for 40 years, what do you think the older generation was saying to the younger generation as they came up underneath of them? Entitled kids. They think they're going to go into the promised land, right? And we can look at someone and only see entitlement instead of the promises of God on their life. And I felt God say this to me today about the Dove family, is that we can be the Joshua and Caleb's for a generation. That we can believe in our young people before they believe in themselves. Because businesses everywhere are talking about how they're going to reach Generation Z. Every article I found is talking about businesses that want to reach Generation Z. And I could hardly find any articles talking about how they're going to reach Generation Z, because there's such a cultural gap. And I feel like God's calling us to be Joshua and Caleb to this Generation Z. And so I challenge you to find a young person that's 7 to 24 years old and believe in them long before they believe in themselves. Speak identity into them. Tell them who they are. And so if you're 7 to 24 years old, I just want you to stand up. And I say, I got 30 seconds. But I say to you, Generation Z, don't ignore the giants that stand in front of us as an army. Take it upon yourself to get a breakthrough for your generation. Take it upon yourself to stand against the giants, and let us give you the stones that you can use to face those giants. Don't go out and take it upon, go alone, but let us send you and stand behind you. We commit to not being the older brother of David. And we commit to not being the older generation that calls you entitled anymore. But we say, go and do what's in your heart. Take down the giants of pornography, of sex trafficking, of every demonic stronghold that stands against our generation. In Jesus' name.